Chapter 6. The House of Spirits. Could the last clue be found in an ancient parable? The parable. The final puzzle piece lies in an ancient passage recorded in the New Testament. The words of Yeshua, Jesus, given to his disciples. A parable within which is a revelation to profound, massive, and prophetic ramifications for the modern world and our own day. He said this: when an unclean spirit goes out of a man, he goes through dry places seeking rest and finds none. Then he says, I will return to my house from which I came. What does it mean? And how does it relate to the matters of the gods? And what significance could it contain concerning modern times? The House of Spirits. The passage speaks of a man possessed by an unclean spirit. The man is delivered of that spirit. The spirit then wanders through dry places, presumably the desert, but finds no place to rest. It then decides to return to its house, the formerly possessed man. But when it returns, it finds that its former dwelling place, the man, is empty, swept, clean, and set in order. The cleansed state of the vessel leads the spirit to go and bring back 7 other spirits more evil than itself. So the man is now possessed by 7 other spirits, in addition to the original one. He is thus now in a worse condition at the end than he was at the beginning. At first glance it would seem that the parable is talking about a possessed and delivered man, who then becomes repossessed. It certainly could be applied to a possessed individual, but the parable is actually not about the man at all. It is only an illustration, an example, an analogy used to reveal a spiritual principle and give a prophetic warning. Spirits of Rome. The key comes in the last words of the parable, also stating that the last state of that man is worse than the first. Jesus says, so shall it also be with this wicked generation. Thus the parable is not about individual possession but collective or mass possession. The possession of a generation, a culture, a civilization. The parable's immediate application appears to be the generation that lived in 1st century Judea, but the principles revealed in the parable extend far beyond the age and borders of that nation. They apply to Western civilization as a whole and span the entire age into the modern world. Also, 2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire and Western civilization comprised a house of spirits, a civilization possessed of gods and spirits. But into that house came the Word of God, the Spirit of God, the Gospel. Western civilization was thus set free from the spirits and became, as in the parable, a house set in order, a civilization cleansed. So then, what happened to the principalities? The parable answers that the spirits still exist but now dwell outside the house. So in the case of Western civilization, the spirits that once possessed is still existed, but now dwelled outside the borders of that civilization. They roamed the dry places, the desolate lands. They dwelled in the shadows. They dwelled in exile. Return of the spirits. The spirit in the parable finds no rest, so it seeks to return to its house to repossess it. When Jesus was about to cast the spirits out of the possessed man, known as the demoniac. It is recorded that the spirits pleaded with him to be cast into a nearby herd of pigs. The spirits are parasitic. They need a host to possess. Thus the spirits cast out of Western civilization, if they find no rest, if they find no comparable civilization to possess, will seek to return to what they believe is their house. And thus we would expect that the same spirits that once possessed Western civilization would seek to do so again. But the question must be asked, how could the spirit return to the house from which it has been dispossessed? The empty house and the 7 others. It could only do so if the house had become unoccupied, empty, and the door has been left open. The parable continues, and when he comes, he finds it empty, swept and put in order. The house is clean and set in order because of its initial deliverance or exorcism, and yet the implication is that no one is now living there. The house was left empty, thus it is open to being reoccupied. Then he goes and takes with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there, and the last state of that man is worse than the first. Since the house is clean, swept and in order, the spirit brings in 7 other spirits to join in their repossession. The implication is that if the house had not been cleansed and set in order, the spirit would not have brought back the other spirits to occupy it. The darker state, and therein lies the warning. The house that is cleansed and put in order, but remains empty, will be repossessed, and if it should be repossessed, it will end up in a worse state than if it had never been cleansed. What happens if we apply this to an entire civilization? It would translate to this: should a culture, a society, a nation, or a civilization be cleansed, exorcised, or the god of the gods and spirits, but then remain or become empty, it will be repossessed by the gods and spirits that once possessed it and more, and it will end up in a far worse state than if it had never been cleansed or exorcised at all. It will, according to the parable, end up many times more possessed and evil than before. The door to repossession. But in the case of Western civilization, how would it happen? How would the spirits re-enter the house from which they were cast out? How would the gods return? In the scriptural accounts of exorcism, the spirits are cast out by the word and power of God, and in the name of and authority of Jesus. When the Roman Empire and Western civilization were delivered from the spirits and gods, it happened the same way, by the word and power of God and by the name and authority of Jesus. Therefore, how could the spirits and gods return to Western civilization? Only one way: if that civilization should ever turn away from God, from His word, from the gospel, from Christianity, from Jesus. If it should do so, then that which drove out the spirits will no longer be present to protect it against their return, and the civilization that had been delivered of the spirits will become repossessed by them. The gods will return. Pre-Christian versus post-Christian. And what would happen then? According to the parable, the repossessed house will end up far worse than at the beginning. Taken into the realm of world history, it means this: A post-Christian civilization will end up in a far darker state than a pre-Christian civilization. If Western civilization turns away from God, what will come of it will be much darker and far more dangerous than what it was in its days of paganism. It is no accident that the modern world and not the ancient has been responsible for unleashing the greatest evils upon the world, and it is no accident that when nations and civilizations that had once known God turned away, when they turned against the Christian faith they had once received, what then came upon them would often be described in terms of the demonic. A pre-Christian civilization may produce a Caligula or a Nero, but a post-Christian civilization will produce a Stalin or a Hitler. A pre-Christian society may give birth to barbarity, but a post-Christian society will give birth to even darker offspring, fascism, communism, and Nazism. A pre-Christian nation may erect an altar of human sacrifice, but a post-Christian nation will build Auschwitz. For a nation or civilization that had once known God, that was once delivered of the gods and spirits. To turn away from God is a most dangerous thing. The gods will return to it. It is not for us now to open up the mysteries behind the return of the spirits and gods to such nations and powers as the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany, but it is for this book to open up the mystery behind the return of the gods and spirits in our own day and to our own culture and civilization. The return of the gods to America and Western civilization, and by this to the world. It is a mystery that touches all of us, just as the working of the gods and spirits is now touching, altering, and transforming the world around us. If the gods were to return to the modern world and to America, how would they do so? Is there an ancient template that reveals the answer? And what is the Dark Trinity?